Hello there, and thanks for joining us today with this episode of the GrowVC Everyone Funding Startups podcast. Entrepreneurs have plenty of ups and downs during their careers. The ups are commonly talked about. How about the downs? I'm your host, Marcus, and today we're joined by Cassandra Phillips, organizer of FailCon, that aims at sharing these learning opportunities specifically from the downs. Cassandra, would you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. As you said, my name is Cassandra Phillips. I'm specifically an event producer in the startup industry of Silicon Valley. So along with FailCon, I also work with other entrepreneurs on conferences, including the SF Music Tech Summit, Inside Social Apps, a gaming event, Finance for Founders, and a conference coming up called the Unleashed Conference. And then I manage a mailing list of about 5,000 Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, to which I send an email that includes all of the upcoming startup team events to try to keep the community communicating with itself and each other.
And while we're at it, what is FailCon in a nutshell?
FailCon is an event that focuses on business failures, common mistakes that you're likely to make and encounter, how you can prepare for them, how you can recover if they hit you, and how to avoid them if possible. It's a great place to just let entrepreneurs talk about some of the, as you said, some of the downs that they're likely to encounter along the way.
Before moving on, let's look at the member highlight from our community this week. And this week that's a startup called Qubit. Qubit is a revolutionary way of keeping and exchanging business cards and keeping your contacts updated. With Qubit, you will always have the relevant information on your contacts and never lose a business card. You can keep in touch with Qubit in our community and follow their progress on qubit.com as well. Now let's continue with our main discussion topic, learning from failure.
Let's briefly talk about FailCon this year, and it'll take place on the 25th of October with over 400 relevant participants.
We're looking probably to hit about 500 this year, which is great.
It's
predominantly founders and investors. And you asked what I would expect from it?
Yeah. What would you expect from this year's FailCon?
Well, we've definitely made it a lot larger for the growing audience as well. We have 2 workshop tracks, which are going to be great. Generally, what I expect is similar to last year. Unlike a lot of the conferences that I attend, I feel like when I walk into a room, it sometimes can be a little stuffy. A lot of the conversations are the same things you hear every day, the networking conversations. At FailCon, we have a way of really encouraging the audience with a fun topic, that everyone comes in with their guard let down a little bit. Everyone has to be ready to say, hey, I made a mistake. I've made mistakes. So at this year's event, I expect another very open crowd, a lot of discussions that are different than what you normally hear at a show. Many of our speakers are relatively large names. If you look at the website, there's David Pogue, Steve Blank, Esther Dyson. And they come with me prepping them saying, you have to have mistakes you're ready to talk about. You have to get on stage and say, here is a failure I had. Here is a misunderstanding that I experienced. Here is how I solved it and overcame it. And sometimes the solution to overcoming it isn't even discussed. That they weren't even able to overcome it, and it just ends up being a failure that they had to move on from.
I mean, I guess that's quite a typical failure in that sense.
Right. We're hoping to not make that so typical. I'd love to make every failure something that you can recover from relatively easily.
Yeah, I can imagine that a convention like this with a topic as kind of humbling as failure, it must really spark a very intimate atmosphere into the whole crowd.
It does. And that's part of why I started a workshop track that'll only fit about 30 to 50 people in the room. Because last year I felt like despite having 400 people, it really felt like I got to know a fair number of the attendees, that they'd come up to me and we'd talk. And people are much more willing, as I mentioned before, to talk about the mistakes they've made along the way and not just pitch their company to one another.
And last year, that was the first time you organized FailCon.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed to be quite the success. So what was organizing FailCon for the first time? What was the experience like?
As far as organizing a regular conference goes, it was pretty easy. I had done conferences in the past. To do a conference specifically on failure was quite different. I was first off surprised by how many people actually wanted to speak. It was remarkable how many speaking requests I got. I thought I would be struggling with having to plead with people to admit their mistakes and to really beg them to open up and tell some secrets. And most people, when given a platform that is safe and is supportive, really wanted to speak. A lot of it almost became, I don't want to say therapy because I did want to make sure everyone was learning from it, but a sort of therapy, an ability to really say, hey, I'm just like you. I was also surprised at the dichotomy of people's feelings towards it. I had never done a show. All of my past shows, people had never had a very passionate stance toward the show one way or the other. Everyone thought, oh, it's just another industry event. I had many emails sent to me saying either, this is the best idea ever, I love that you're doing this, the community really needs this. And I had people emailing me saying, this is a terrible idea, I can't believe you would ever put on a show like this. This is awful. This is so unsupportive. And for me, I actually enjoyed getting both of those emails because it meant I had created something that people were passionate about one way or the other. And so that was very different. And thirdly, finding sponsors was the one really challenging part. People love speaking at shows on failure. I've noticed people don't necessarily like sponsoring a show on failure, despite my showing that it brands our sponsors as leaders in the industry that really understand the problems of their users. Big companies still don't really want FailCon as one of their investments.
I can see why that would be kind of a hard thing to sell. But what about the speakers last year? Who did you have share their stories?
We had about 25 people. Some of the big names that your listeners might know include Max Levchin, who was one of the co-founders of PayPal and the founder of Slide, recently acquired by Google. Mark Pincus, the founder of Zynga. We had the founding team of Meebo do a great talk on early team development and early hiring mistakes. We had Lynn Johnson, who at the time was the, community manager and co-editor of Fast Company magazine. We had Max Ventilla of Aardvark, who recently sold his company to Google as well. So it was a pretty nicely rounded lineup.
And I think the most obvious speakers on a topic like failure would be the entrepreneurs. But did you have other types of people also present?
Oh, of course. We had probably one of the most well-received talks was actually by Brandon Schauer of Adaptive Path, which does design work for larger companies. And he gave a great talk on how Adaptive Path incorporates failure into their very design process, that they're now at the point that they understand that they will, with every single client, have a small failure. The goal being to keep it small, to make it just designing the site in a way that some buttons are not in places they like, and just making that an accepted part of the process, that it is through designing mistakes into your web page that you hear the user's actual feelings and you hear the client's actual feelings. And so that was a really great talk by someone who was not a founder. He was a designer. We had another well-received discussion, a panel discussion on investment failures and how investors should deal with entrepreneurs whose companies are not doing very well that they might have invested in, and what they watch out for, what are early red flags when entrepreneurs are pitching to them. And that panel got a very heated discussion on it, specifically between David Hornick of August Capital and Adeo Ressi of The Funded. I believe the video is up online, but I know that talk, it was between how you respond to an entrepreneur and how you support them when their company is not doing well. And it was quite the heated discussion.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's also one of these situations where emotions are usually not that absent and everyone's kind of caught up in the drama and there's lots of tensions all around. So
yep,
that's probably one of those things that is not the most common discussion point, but it can be very insightful for others to hear about.
Right. And I feel like quite a bit of FailCon is like that, where we're trying to just stimulate discussions that aren't the ones you're going to hear at most of the other conferences you attend. And
were there any reoccurring topics with the speakers or among any of the attendees at the conference?
Oh, there definitely were. There's a couple of stories that it seems like every single entrepreneur has, a mistake that if they haven't made it yet, they will. And the problem with most of them is they are mistakes that you will hear other people tell you not to make, and you will still make them. I had an early company that I founded. I spent about 6 months trying to develop it with two of my friends, and we made the same mistakes. One of them is letting go and being able to